I started working nights on Pavilion C because nobody else would. It's the forgotten wing, a crooked L-shaped corridor tacked onto the old tuberculosis ward when polio was still a threat. During daylight, the vinyl floors look the same as anywhere else in St. Dunstan's, but past midnight, every surface seems to sweat. The fluorescent bulbs flicker, refuse to warm fully, and the paint peels in long, curling strips like wet bandages. Most of our residents come here only to linger, stroke survivors who can't swallow, octogenarians whose hearts take along on borrowed seconds, people who will never be extubated. Some of them still mumble through the ventilator hiss, but most nights all you hear is machinery and the regulated sigh of pressurized air. My second week in, Mrs. Alvarez whispered that something was scratching above her ceiling tiles. She'd been intubated so long her voice came out like a match striking. I promised to have maintenance look. The next night, Mr. Desai, 2 rooms down, complained of the same noise, tapping that migrated from vent to vent as if something paced overhead. When I asked housekeeping, Danny, the night janitor, shrugged. "Probably a loose fan belt," she said, but her eyes slid toward the ceiling with a wary tilt, the way you watch a spider you can't quite reach. On Friday, Pavilion C stank. Not a bedpan aroma, not infected tissue. Something gamey and silty like washed-up river mud left under heat. I checked every linen hamper, cracked open the chemical disposal bins, even sniffed the glucometer waste, but the smell seemed woven straight into the air. By 4 a.m., the nurses were trading peppermint oil like contraband. We blamed the ventilation until the engineers swore all the dampers were clear. They suggested maybe a dying raccoon had crawled into the ductwork. They'd come after the weekend to check. At 2:17 Sunday morning, the fire panel flicked red over room C-14 duct detector fault. I silenced the alarm and slipped inside with my flashlight. Mr. Desai was already awake. His eyes tracked the slow rinse of light across the ceiling while the ventilator kept time. The acoustic tiles above the return vent bowed down in the center as if someone had knelt heavily on them from above. Scratch marks, fresh, uneven, raked toward the grill. They were too wide for rat claws, too shallow for a screwdriver. Something had worried at the metal mesh until 2 louvers snapped loose, dangling like broken teeth. I climbed onto a rolling supply cart, pried the grill farther, and shone my beam into the duct. Dust motes churned. Beyond the first elbow, the metal tube widened into a junction box big enough for a crouching adult. The flashlight halo caught tangled fibers glued to the sheet metal, clots of matted fur the color of basement water. Beneath them was something worse, scores of small off-white chips, almost decorative, arranged in a careful ring. I tugged one free with a gloved hand, thinking it a fragment of old PVC, and froze. A human incisor, worn flat at the tip, yellowed at the root. The next piece I touched was a molar, still crowned with silver amalgam. Dozens more waited, tiled end to end like a grisly mosaic. Down the hall, nurses began paging for me, vitals dropping, pump alarms singing. I reseated the vent cover, pretending my hands weren't shaking, and ran back out. By dawn, I'd nearly convinced myself I'd found an abandoned dental loadout, some grotesque med school prank left from the 60s. Even as I filed the incident report, I edited the details: animal nesting debris, possible biohazard, request maintenance inspection, a SAP. Writing what I'd really seen felt like introducing a rumor that would spread faster than any contagion. Maintenance never came. Monday night, the overhead lights in Pavilion C flicked off in a sweep, row by row, plunging the whole wing into emergency illumination. We keep battery lanterns for hurricanes, and while I hunted one in the supply closet, I heard it. Not the timid scratching the patients described, but a deliberate drag, nails on aluminum, methodical, like someone winnowing kernels from a cob. It started at the far end near the service elevator and advanced ceiling panel by panel, steering toward the nurse's station where I stood unmoving behind the medication cart. The emergency lights cast only a red glow, just enough to see the tiles bulge as weight settled onto the crossbars. The sound stopped directly above reception. Dust sifted down onto the computer keyboard. I waited, lungs held tight, trying to hear through my pulse. When a plastic nameplate slid off the desk and cracked, I flinched and knocked my own lantern against the counter. The clang echoed up the ductwork, metallic and sharp. Whatever was up there shifted its weight. The tiles flexed, then relaxed. The drag resumed, retreating the way it had come, slow, patient, unhurried, as though I had merely delayed an appointment. After facilities restored power, I convinced Danny to open the service hatch with me. She cursed in Spanish as we pulled ourselves into the crawl space. The junction metal was smeared with something oily, pungent. Farther in lay a pile of shredded hospital blankets, the cotton gray with grime and laced through with hair. In the middle of that heap glinted a crescent of teeth, thousands maybe, sorted by size like seashells a child might arrange by shape. They weren't glued or mortared. They lay loose, yet none rolled away from the curve. I'd seen rodent hordes, birds, trash, the occasional ring, but nothing collected teeth. Nothing curated them. Danny's face creased. She spat over the edge and muttered about calling animal control. We backed out fast. I dropped the hatch, turned to lock it, and found a smear of red across my right forearm. I hadn't felt a cut, nor did the blood smell human. It carried the same marsh rot odor that hung in the hallway, thick and inland and terribly alive. I showered twice after my shift, but by evening I still picked phantom grit from the crease of my elbow. When my shift started again at midnight, the charge nurse told me Pavilion C was short one orderly. Marcus had called in with flu-like symptoms after complaining all day of a raw tickle in his throat. While she spoke, I noticed her keep touching her lower lip, as if a hair were caught there. By 1:30, 3 more staff reported sore gums or a metallic taste when they swallowed. Some of our more lucid patients complained their dentures felt loose. The scratching returned just after 2. This time it didn't pace. It hovered, circling one spot until the tile began to dip. Dust rained lightly, peppering the linoleum between my shoes. I thought of the teeth again, the way they were arrayed in a perfect arc, and how an arc becomes a circle once you keep adding. I thought of the bloody smear that hadn't belonged to me, and how Marcus had gone home nursing his throat. I thought of how teeth anchor more than smiles. They keep us articulated, pronounce words, define faces, and how something, somewhere inside this metal labyrinth, was stockpiling them the way a predator stores calcium for hatchlings. I called security. They promised a sweep, but nobody came for 40 minutes. In that time, the ceiling panel above room C-12 sank down until its corner scraped the top of the IV pole. The patient inside, one of the awake and aware strokes, pressed their call button so hard it jammed. I approached with my flashlight, stepping over loops of telemetry cable, and nearly missed the whisper. Not human speech, an exhalation broken by clicks like knuckles cracking inside a throat. It came from behind the vent grill, and as I swung the light up, the clicks ceased. Something skittered backward, claws skimming metal. The tile bounced twice, then lay still. Security finally arrived with a ladder, but I could barely speak to direct them. My tongue felt thick, my gums throbbing the way they do before a fever. One guard climbed up, lifted a tile, and immediately gagged at the stench. He shone his light only a second before swearing and scrambling down. "Call animal control," he said, eyes watering, "and maybe the police." My shift ended at 6, but I lingered for sunrise rounds. Mrs. Alvarez was restless, her respirations agitated. When I adjusted her mask, she stared past me, upper lip quivering. I followed her line of sight to the HVAC grate just above the headboard. The screws at each corner were missing. As I watched, the grill gave the faintest metallic tremor, one gentle inhale, one delicate test of space, and then went still. I reseated the screws with shaking hands, promising myself I'd write everything this time, every detail. These words are that promise. And if administration buries tonight's report like they buried the last one, at least I have started a record of the scratching in Pavilion C, of the nest built from things we thought belonged to us, of the way the hall air tastes like river mud, and of how, even now, my molars feel loose when I clench my jaw. That night, I didn't go home. I parked in the staff lot and sat with the engine off, watching the sky lighten through my windshield, hands trembling faintly on the wheel. Every time I blinked, I saw the nest, The mound of human teeth like some warped museum exhibit, laid out with the care of a collector. I tried calling Danny. No answer. I tried Marcus, straight to voicemail. By 8:12 a.m. I had sent 4 emails to admin, each more detailed than the last, and got only a canned response about facility safety protocols under review. Before noon they'd closed Pavilion C for deep cleaning, no further explanation. The few patients stable enough to move were transferred. The others were kept in their rooms, windows sealed, vents taped. Nobody said the word infestation, but people whispered it anyway. Rats, raccoons, mold spores, even a gas leak. Nobody mentioned the teeth. I stayed past my shift, wandering back halls looking for Danny. Her cart was still parked near the service elevator. Half-used bleach bottles sat in the tray. Her mop stood stiff with dried cleaner. One of her gloves was balled under the wheel. No one had seen her leave. Security assumed she'd gone home sick, maybe passed out in her car, but she never clocked out. In the locker room, I found my emergency flashlight still smeared with duct grime. I hadn't told anyone about the whisper I heard behind the C12 grate, but the sound replayed in my mind over and over. Clicks, not language exactly, but organized. Curious, testing maybe. I remembered how it didn't run away until I turned the light on, and how it waited. That's when I started to believe this wasn't an animal, at least not one we'd cataloged. By early evening I was back in the closed-off wing. I shouldn't have been. I wasn't on shift. But no one stopped me, maybe because I walked like I belonged. I slipped through the plastic curtain at the end of Pavilion C, past the flickering quarantine signage, and felt the temperature drop by at least 5 degrees. The stink hit me harder this time, thick, spoiled, like a wet wound. The air buzzed faintly with something I couldn't place, electrical hum or maybe a vibration beneath the floor. Room C-14 was dark, the curtains drawn, the bed still occupied. Mr. Desai was gone. I checked the whiteboard. His name was smudged out, a fresh one written above it, bed vacant. But the bed wasn't stripped. His slippers were under the chair. His bag was still in the drawer, unopened, and the band around his wrist monitor blinked red from the tray. I didn't know how a 170-pound man vanishes from a hospital bed without a code being called. No chart, no discharge, just replaced, erased. I lifted the vent panel again, slower this time, and aimed my flashlight inside. The junction was clean now. The nest was gone. The fur, the blood, even the teeth, gone. Only the outline remained, a faint brownish ring where the pile had compressed the dust. The smell, however, was stronger. I backed out, resecured the vent, and returned to the nurse's station to check patient logs. 3 names had disappeared from the roster since Friday. Mr. Desai, a dementia patient named Morris Wexley, and a nonverbal trauma case called Nadia P., all listed as transferred, but no destination. The transfer ID codes were empty. A null value. No timestamps, no signatures. Just 3 vacant beds and no official record of where the occupants had gone. At 9:03 p.m. I heard the first bang. It came from the ceiling over room C-8, one heavy impact, like a knee dropping hard onto metal, then silence, then another, closer. I stood stock still beside the crash cart, flashlight in one hand, breath locked in my chest. The hallway lights dimmed, then steadied. Another bang. This time, the tile over room C-6 flexed visibly. I wasn't alone. I raised the flashlight and held the beam steady. The moment I did, the noise stopped, like last time, like it was waiting again. I stepped slowly toward the room, each footfall deliberate and silent. The air around me felt wrong, as if it were already reacting to something I hadn't yet seen. When I reached C-06 and peeked inside, I saw her, Nadia P., still in her bed, still intubated. She wasn't gone after all, but she wasn't alone either. A shape hung above her in the shadows, pressed against the vent like a bat in a crawl space. I couldn't make it out fully, just the negative space around it, a kind of fluid outline that moved slightly, like breathing. I blinked, and it shifted, as if the act of seeing it directly weakened it. Like light through a lens, it retreated an inch, then another. I stepped inside. Nadia's eyes were wide, locked on the ceiling. Her fingers trembled against the sheets, twitching in tiny pulses like Morse code. Her vitals were steady on the monitor, but her gaze never broke from the shape above her. She saw it too. I turned the flashlight higher, casting the full beam into the grill, and the shape hissed. Not a loud sound, not even threatening, more like the exhale of air leaving a chamber too tight. My beam caught something glistening, black, ridged, wet, then claws, 4 long, tapering claws that folded up and away, pulling into the duct as the thing drew back. Something fell from the vent. I flinched, then realized it wasn't part of the creature. It was a tooth, still bloody. Human. I stepped forward and picked it up. An upper canine, snapped at the root. I don't know what made me do it, but I reached for Nadia's mouth, pulled back the oxygen mask gently. She was missing the same tooth. I backed away, shaking. Whatever was living in the vents, it was feeding, not eating exactly, collecting, taking. Something about the pressure in the air made my ears throb. I checked the hallway monitor and saw the alert: HVAC access door breached, sub-level vent open, another alert, unauthorized hatch activity, roof duct. Whatever it was moving. Fast. I ran, out of C-6, past the deserted hallway, straight for the utility stairs. The main elevators were down, cut off since the cleaning lockdown started. My flashlight danced over the walls as I took the steps 3 at a time. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay beneath that ceiling. 3rd floor, 2nd, then a sound stopped me, something behind the wall, matching me pace for pace, not footsteps, but movement, claws on metal, a skittering whisper that undulated with my rhythm. Every time I paused, it paused. Every time I ran, it followed, not just behind, above, beside. I reached the 1st floor landing and slammed through the fire exit into the east corridor. The air there was stale, sour. I turned left and froze. The ceiling vent just ahead of me was already open, not hanging loose, completely removed. The space above yawned black and wet and waiting. I took one slow step back. A whisper echoed from inside the duct, not a voice, not a word, but a rhythm. Tap, tap, click, tap, tap, click. Then silence. I backed away further, heart pounding, breath coming fast. That's when I noticed the floor, a trail of smudged prints. Not footprints, no toes, just pressure marks, oddly spaced, as though something with elongated limbs had dropped from the vent and dragged itself forward on elbows and knuckles. They led down the hallway toward pediatrics, toward the newborn ward. I ran, slipped twice, once in something sticky, and kept running. As I turned the corner, the security lights flickered and the door to pediatrics groaned. It was open, not wide, just cracked, just enough. Inside, the lights were off. The emergency LEDs painted the incubators in dull red. I counted them quickly. 5 occupied, 3 empty, no staff, no sound. Then I heard it, a soft clattering above, the sound of something nesting, not fast, not panicked, deliberate, constructive. I aimed the flashlight at the vent above the 4th incubator. Teeth, already, dozens, laid in a circle just beginning to form, and in the corner, coiled like a shadow pretending not to move, was something watching me. Something, learning. It didn't move. That was the worst part. It didn't dart away like a rat or hiss like some cornered predator. It just watched, nestled in shadow, the barest outline of it visible in the red emergency light. It was like my brain refused to make sense of its shape. I could tell it had limbs, long ones, but they bent in odd places, folding twice where a human's might only once. A knotted ridge of something darker than the rest curved where a head might be. I didn't see eyes, but I felt them, focused, curious. The teeth were freshly laid. 6 or 7 so far, all adult-sized. One still had a crown. It had arranged them in that same spiral pattern I'd seen before, beginning to arc inward like a galaxy forming. I should have run. Instead, I whispered, "What do you want?" My voice sounded like it didn't belong to me, too soft, too dry. The thing didn't answer. But behind me, the corridor's lights snapped on, just one strip flickering to life, and in that half-second flash, the silhouette became clear. Not its face, not details, just shape, like an impression behind frosted glass. Its torso was flat, ribless. Its limbs were longer than its entire body, elbows bending up and out like insect legs. The skin, if that's what it had, was the color of something drowned, and draped across one forearm was something worse than its body. A nurse's ID badge. Danny's. It dangled from a broken lanyard. The photo side was clean, as if licked. My breath caught. The light flickered off again, plunging the room back into that soft red glow. The thing was gone. Not a sound, not a scuttle, just vanished. I heard a faint clang far above me, like the inside of a distant duct reverberating. Then silence. I approached the incubator, carefully. The baby inside squirmed, unaware of what had been above her just seconds before. I checked her mouth, not even sure why, and found a smudge of something dark near her lip. Not blood, grease, the same greasy residue I'd seen in the duct junctions. A mark, a trace. It had been here before. I backed out of pediatrics slowly and didn't stop moving until I hit the main lobby. 2 security guards were posted near the front desk. Leaning half asleep on their elbows, I shouted, "There's something in the vents!" They stood up fast, hands moving to radios. "I've seen it twice," I said. "It was just in pediatrics." It dropped teeth. They exchanged a look. "Teeth?" one asked. "Human?" I nodded. "Check the duct above the 4th incubator. It's nesting." That made them hesitate. The younger one called someone on his walkie, speaking in clipped tones. The older one motioned for me to sit down. "We'll take it from here." But I couldn't sit. I paced, watched, waited. And when the guards finally returned 15 minutes later, they shook their heads. No sign of anything, no teeth, vents all sealed. But I saw, "You're not on the schedule tonight, are you?" That silenced me. I realized how I must have sounded. Hysterical, delusional. The younger guard offered a forced smile. "It's been a rough few weeks. Maybe take a break. You'll feel better." I wanted to scream, but something deeper in me, a gut instinct older than logic, told me not to push, not to press. I just nodded, left, but I didn't go home. I drove instead to the nearest 24-hour diner, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and stared at the black screen of my phone for hours. At 3:12 a.m., I got a text from an unknown number. "Don't speak about it again. Do not return to Pavilion C." That was it. No name, no signature. I texted back, "Who is this?" No response. I ran the number through a reverse lookup app. Nothing. Blocked. The next day, Pavilion C was reopened, just like that, as if nothing had happened, as if no one had gone missing. The admin announcement said the cleaning was complete and HVAC functionality fully restored. Patients returned. Nurses resumed shifts. Everything carried on, just slightly off. Marcus never came back. Danny's name was removed from the roster. I overheard 2 orderlies whispering that someone else from facilities had gone missing. A guy named Rob, last seen near the roof hatches, working on a seized fan motor. Took a fall, they said, or something. They didn't find his body. No funeral, no obituary, just gone. And in his place, a new name on the staff bulletin. Temporary night tech, subject 42, HVAC liaison. No photo, no real name, just the ID, subject 42. He showed up during my next night shift. Didn't talk, didn't blink much either. Wore dark gray coveralls and carried a heavy black case he never let out of arm's reach. When he walked through the halls, nurses moved aside without a word. He'd stop in front of vents, stand there for several minutes, then take out a device that hummed quietly while he pressed it to the grill. When I asked who he reported to, nobody answered. When I asked what he was scanning for, he looked at me for 3 full seconds before saying, "Echoes." That's all, just echoes. By week's end, I stopped seeing him. He didn't check out, didn't hand off a report. He just disappeared. But the scratching returned. Subtler now, like it had learned to avoid attention. It started in the walls this time, not the ceilings. Low, near vents just above floor level, as if it had grown bolder, or changed shape. On 3 occasions, a patient in end-of-life care flatlined without cause. No stroke, no embolism, just Silence. When nurses arrived, their mouths were open like they'd been mid-sentence. Each had blood pooled behind their teeth. Each was missing a tooth, just one, and always a different one, as if it were collecting the set. One night I brought pliers. I know how that sounds. I didn't want to do it, but the idea had nested in me, just like the thing in the vents. What if I gave it what it wanted? What if I fed it? It had already taken from Nadia, from Mr. Desai. But maybe if I gave something freely, it would stop. I picked a molar, top left, already cracked. I stared at myself in the mirror, locked the staff bathroom, and gripped the tooth with the pliers. It took 3 tries. When it came out, blood filled my mouth so fast I gagged. I dropped the tooth into a sterile specimen jar, screwed the lid on, and took it with me back to Pavilion C. I waited until 2 a.m. Then I unscrewed the vent cover above room C-12 and slid the jar inside. The scratching stopped for 5 nights. On the 6th, I found the jar returned, empty, and next to it another tooth, not mine, a child's. Still rooted in soft pink flesh. That's when I knew. It wasn't trading. It was playing. I tried to quit, filed paperwork, asked for reassignment, even considered transferring out of St. Dunstan's entirely, but I couldn't leave. Every night I found myself driving there anyway, even off shift, even when I wasn't scheduled. It's like it knew my routines, like it had threaded itself into my habits, like it chose me. 2 nights ago I woke up in my apartment with dust in my mouth, that fine gray HVAC dust that coats the inside of old vents. My hands were scratched. My teeth ached. I went to the bathroom and turned on the light. There, in the mirror, on the rim of the sink, one of my canines, laid out gently, as if returned, or rejected. I haven't slept since. The vents in my ceiling hum louder now, not the usual drone, something more thoughtful. Every once in a while I hear a tap-tap click, like it's checking on me, waiting. The nest is growing. I know because I've started seeing them again. Not just in Pavilion C, but elsewhere. Teeth, single ones at first, then little arcs, in the laundry chute, behind the med fridge, even in the elevator shaft. It's spreading, and I think it wants to be noticed. 3 nights ago, the hospital ran a full fire drill. They cleared all wings, evacuated patients who could be moved, even wheeled out a few on life support just to meet protocol. I don't know if they were really testing the alarms or if someone knew what was coming. I stayed in the west stairwell while the rest of Pavilion C emptied out. They never checked it. Most people think that stairwell's been sealed since the asbestos scare last year, but I kept the bypass badge from the old contractor crew. At exactly 2:06 a.m., the overhead vents in room C-10 let out a groan so loud I thought the ceiling would cave in. No one else was there to hear it. The entire hallway felt pressurized, like the air had been sucked from the space and replaced with something heavier, denser. I crouched near the corner behind the linen bin and didn't move for 5 whole minutes. Then I saw it. Not the whole thing, never the whole thing. It emerged from the ceiling like smoke leaking from a broken pipe. Limbs came first, long, narrow, folding outward. Then the rest slithered down in pieces, too fluid for a creature with joints. Its skin, or whatever wrapped its body, was mottled gray-green like something that had lived in wet stone for too long. What passed for a head dipped toward the ground, then twisted upside down, the way an owl might rotate, and stared directly at the empty bed. There was no patient, just the nest, the one it had rebuilt in room C-10's vent. I had seen part of it through the grate the day before, a half spiral of molars and baby teeth, interlaced with feeding tubes and stripped medical tape. It looked like something caught between the artistic and the fungal, and it was growing outward now, colonizing the corners. The thing crawled across the ceiling, not under it, across it. Its body never fully touched the floor. The joints in its limbs bent the wrong way, as if meant for vertical motion, for shafts, for ductwork. It didn't notice me. Or maybe it did. Maybe it just didn't care. That was worse. After the fire drill ended and Pavilion C reopened, everything felt scrubbed. Not clean, erased, sanitized. The nest in room C-10 was gone. The vent cover had been replaced. but I could still smell it. That metallic mud stink that settles in your teeth like a sickness. And on the nurse's station monitor, I noticed something new. An alert window in the top right corner. Duct camera feed. Access restricted. I'd never seen that prompt before. It wasn't a regular feed. It was buried behind 4 security credentials, the kind only facility command was supposed to have. But I'd kept Danny's login badge, the one I found on the thing's arm. I scanned it at the terminal. Access granted. The camera feeds loaded one by one. Grayscale images, all vents. Some stretched for yards in low-resolution corridors of flickering dust. Others zoomed in on junction boxes with wires sparking and shaking. And then on feed 7C, teeth. Rows and rows of them, attached to nothing, lined up like bones waiting to be categorized. Some still had gums clinging to them. A few were children's. The pile shifted faintly every few seconds as if something just off-screen breathed too hard. Then the feed glitched. It didn't cut out, just jumped, one frame to the next, and in the new frame the camera had been turned. A hand, long-fingered, ridged, with what looked like surgical tubing wound around the wrist, was holding the lens. The image tilted until it faced a dark passage. The far end glowed red. It was watching me now, watching from inside the system. I backed away from the monitor. The hairs on my neck rose like static. I shut the terminal, but it was too late. I'd confirmed something. It understood us. Not in a primitive animal way. It understood our systems, our cameras, our routines, and it had been navigating them longer than anyone realized. That night, I went home for the first time in days. I locked every vent, taped the edges, stacked furniture beneath the ceiling return in my bedroom, slept on the floor with my back to the wall and a flashlight in my hand. It didn't matter. At 3:02 a.m., my phone rang. No number, no name, just incoming call. I answered. For several seconds there was silence. Then a faint, wet click, like molars tapping together in the dark. Then a whisper. It sounded like Danny. "I left the rest for you," she said, voice distant, muffled, dragging each word like her mouth didn't quite work right. "Check your ceiling," the call cut. My flashlight beam shook as I aimed it up. The grate above my bed had shifted, just slightly. One screw was loose, and on my desk, laid out in a perfect crescent, 7 teeth, all mine, all still bloody. I vomited into the trash bin, gagged until there was nothing left, then stared at the ceiling until morning. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. When the sun came up, I opened my mouth in the mirror. Every tooth still there, still intact, but my gums ached like someone had wrenched them in the night. I touched the back of one molar and nearly screamed. Loose, wobbling slightly. The others weren't far behind. I didn't go to the hospital that night. I drove instead to the edge of town. Parked by the quarry where the old mining tunnels collapsed decades ago. Brought a lantern, my toolbox, a flask. I climbed down the gravel path until I found the ventilation shaft, the one that used to push air into the lower mines. It's still there, rusted and forgotten, a jagged steel mouth ringed with barbed wire. I knelt beside it and listened. After a minute I heard it, not the wind, not pipes, breathing, then a click, then a single word. Soon, it was learning to speak. The next morning, I sat on my apartment floor with a jar of teeth between my knees, unable to open it. The air in the room had grown stale overnight, heavy with the smell of plastic tubing and iodine. I hadn't brought anything back with me, I was sure of that, but the pressure in my skull told a different story. Every few minutes I imagined a breath that wasn't mine expanding through the walls. By 10 a.m., I wrapped the jar in 3 layers of black trash bag and drove it to the river. I thought maybe throwing them away would end it. Maybe it needed something to hold on to, a link, a lure. I hurled the bundle out over the bridge and watched it vanish beneath the water. But even as it disappeared, I felt no relief, only dread, as if I'd just tossed away a warning someone else might find. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I drove back to the hospital and parked outside the north wing in a spot that gave me a full view of Pavilion C's rooftop intake units. I had a thermos of coffee and binoculars I hadn't touched since my uncle took me hunting years ago. I waited. Hours passed. Lights blinked on and off inside, staff came and went, but no one entered the top-level access. Until 3:11 a.m., a panel on the roof slid aside, not opened, slid, like it had been nudged from within. The movement was almost invisible, a twitch in the aluminum skin of the building. A few moments later, something dark crested the rim of the duct. I raised the binoculars trying to find its shape, but it was fast, too fast. Whatever emerged didn't exit the vent like a rat or a raccoon. It flowed, limbs unfurling, pushing outward, body contorting in a way that reminded me of a spider adjusting its stance across a web. And then it did something that made me grip the steering wheel with both hands. It stood, not fully upright, not like a person, but something near it. Its posture shifted, weight settling unevenly on two limbs while the others adjusted behind it. A fifth appendage curved up and pressed against a unit panel. It held still for 30 seconds, maybe listening, maybe sensing. Then it slipped back down. I didn't breathe for a long time after. When sunrise came, I checked myself in the mirror for signs of sleep deprivation. I expected bloodshot eyes, maybe some swelling around my jaw. My molars had been aching again. What I found was something worse, a single round bruise behind my right ear. I hadn't noticed it before. It was too perfect to be accidental. No discoloration, just a soft greenish bloom. I pressed it, and a needle-thin pulse of pain shot down my neck. Something had touched me, not recently, while I slept. I returned to the hospital that evening with no intention of clocking in. I wore my old scrubs, left my badge in the glove box, and entered through the side maintenance corridor while the shift change distracted security. My goal wasn't to check on patients. It wasn't even to stop the thing. I just wanted proof. Proof that what I'd seen in the ducts wasn't some hallucination from stress or sleep deprivation. Pavilion C was quiet, too quiet, even for night shift. The motion-activated lights barely flickered on. The hallway monitors showed vitals, but every patient's room was dark. Curtains drawn, doors cracked just wide enough to feel like they'd been opened, not by staff, but by something passing through. I stood at the nurse's station and pulled up the duct maintenance logs. There weren't many, but one stood out. Junction scan, duct J17, structure consistent with fetal architecture. Observe but do not remove, dated 5 days ago. Signed by someone named Dr. H. Tyne. We didn't have a Dr. Tyne. I checked the staff roster. No listing, no temp ID, no locum. The name didn't exist in our system. I copied the log to a flash drive I carried in my pocket and moved toward the end of the hallway. Room C-18. It was one of the oldest in the building. It still had an analog vent near the floor below the bed. No cover, just an opening in the wall lined with dark metal slats. I crouched beside it, and I listened. Not for breath, not for movement, for pattern, for meaning. Because I was starting to suspect that the scratching, the clicking, the pacing, it wasn't random, and it wasn't instinctual. It was designed. I heard it faintly, a rhythmic pulse of contact against the inner duct walls. Like a code, a sequence. 1, do. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Over and over. I pressed my phone against the opening and hit record. The sound stopped. The air inside shifted, and something touched the tip of my shoe. I didn't see it, not clearly, just pressure, then heat, then the smallest tap on the edge of my foot, and something rolled out of the dark, a tooth, fresh, bloody. Still warm, it bounced once against the floor tile and landed beside my knee. I didn't pick it up. I ran. I made it halfway down the corridor before I froze, because lying in the center of the hallway was a blanket, neatly folded, and atop it, laid out in the same arc I'd seen in every nest, were 5 more teeth. One was gold-capped. I knew that tooth. I'd helped remove it from a man named Roy Bellamy, a stroke patient with a pacemaker and no family. He died 2 nights ago. Coded at 2:44 a.m. No autopsy, no dental clearance, but his tooth was here. I checked his chart. No dental scan ever ordered. No final examination. Just a discharge notation marked with a reference code I didn't recognize. Disposition vent cavity 6A. There were no disposition codes like that. I'd memorized every one. I went to the basement again. This time I carried bolt cutters. The door marked vent cavity 6A didn't look like anything special. Just another breaker panel near the secondary water pumps. But behind it, the metal was scratched. Long scrapes ran down its length, 4 at a time, each the width of a finger, each dragging from top to bottom like someone trying to dig their way out. I cut the lock. Inside was a crawl space, not a tunnel, a cavity, 6 feet by 4 feet, lined with insulation foam and plastic tubing, not hospital grade, something repurposed. Makeshift, a nest, but larger. This one had no teeth in it. It had something else, medical bracelets, dozens, all snapped open at the clasp, all tagged with names I recognized. Roy Bellamy, Morris Wexley, Nadia P., even Danny, all gone, all processed. The floor of the cavity was uneven. I pressed my hand to it and it gave slightly, something beneath. I tore the insulation back and found metal, a hatch, no handle, just a pressure seal and a smeared handprint, too large to be human, too long. The fingers bowed outward as if the hand were meant to wrap around corners. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I left the cavity, relocked the breaker panel, and walked out of the hospital through the ambulance entrance. As I reached my car, I turned and looked up at Pavilion C's roofline. A vent cover had been removed, and from inside the darkness, something watched, unblinking. I didn't go home after that. I drove for 2 hours past the city, past the suburbs, out into farm country where the roads stop having names. Somewhere after midnight, I pulled over into a gravel lot behind a shuttered gas station and sat there in the dark, engine off, windows up. The hospital was 30 miles behind me, and still I felt the breath of it, warm air in my ear, the faint taste of iodine in my mouth, the shape of something too long moving just beyond the walls of thought. At 3:06 a.m., my car shook, just once, no wind, no storm, just a single tight jolt, like something big had landed on the roof then leapt off. I turned on the cabin light, nothing there. Then I checked the passenger seat. A tooth, lying neatly in the cup holder, not bloody, not fresh, old, yellowed, worn at the root. I didn't scream, not then. Screaming felt like an acknowledgement. Instead, I stared at it until sunrise, then drove to the nearest diner and ordered a plate of eggs I didn't touch. The waitress complimented the color of my scrubs. I hadn't realized I was still wearing them. At 10:15 a.m., I received a message from an unknown number. You've been scheduled for mandatory evaluation. Occupational Wellness Room 3B, 5 p.m. There was no reply field, no way to opt out. When I returned to the hospital, no one looked at me. I don't mean metaphorically, no one looked at me. I walked through the staff lot, past the security desk, into the elevator beside imaging. Nobody met my eyes. Nobody nodded. It was like I didn't exist. At first I thought it was paranoia. Then I entered Pavilion C. It was fully staffed, fully occupied, but silent. I passed 4 nurses, 2 orderlies, and a respiratory tech. All moved with purpose. All ignored me, even when I waved. Even when I said their names, they didn't flinch, like I was part of the wall. I ducked into the staff lounge, thinking maybe I was early for my shift and the system hadn't logged me. But when I opened the login app, my credentials bounced back. Access denied. User not found. I checked the employee directory. I was gone. My profile had been deleted. I stood there with my badge in one hand, watching my own name vanish, and felt something loosen in the floor beneath me. Not physically, not even symbolically. Just that strange sensation of footing that isn't real anymore. Like falling in a dream. I left Pavilion C through the freight corridor and took the stairs down to sublevel B, where the morgue and old laundry tunnels intersect. It always smells like steam and rust down there. That morning it smelled like chlorine and something deeper beneath it, a chemical sweetness like rotting melon. I followed the hallway to the far storage alcove. There, behind a half-broken mop sink, I found the door I was looking for. Occupational Wellness, Room 3B. It wasn't listed on any active floor plans. I knew because I'd checked 3 times the week before. But the door was there now. Fresh paint, fingerprint scanner. No one had told me the code, but the panel turned green when I pressed my thumb to it. The lock disengaged with a hiss. Inside, the lights were already on. There was no chair, no desk, just a square room, 10 feet by 10 feet, with walls that sloped inward at the top like an industrial funnel. The walls were padded, not soft, just coated in acoustic foam like a sound booth. The vent in the ceiling wasn't like the others. No grill, just an opening. Black, wide, oval-shaped, large enough for something to come through. And in the center of the floor, laid out in perfect symmetry, teeth, hundreds, not in piles, in rows, like a library. They were arranged in clusters, molars, incisors, canines. A few still had braces wired around them. I saw one capped in gold, another with a tiny letter J scratched into the enamel. None were mine. Not yet. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just backed toward the door, only to find it had vanished, not closed, gone. Just seamless wall where a door had been seconds before. And then the hum began, low, mechanical, from above, the vent. I didn't look up. I couldn't. Instead, I stared at the rows of teeth and realized what they were. Not just a nest, a record, a collection. Each cluster labeled with a number on a plastic slide, the kind used for patient charts. No names, just identifiers. Subject 03, Subject 07, Subject 11. It kept track. It cataloged. Each person reduced to a dental array, documented, archived, a system of bones. I backed into a corner and sat with my knees to my chest, waiting for the thing to come down. But nothing did. Not then. Not for hours. The light never changed. The hum never stopped. And when I finally dozed off from exhaustion, it wasn't a dream that woke me. It was breath, not mine, against my cheek, warm, wet. I opened my eyes and found nothing there. Just the rows, just the hum. But one of the teeth had moved, shifted position, turned sideways, as if something had inspected it. When the door returned, I didn't even notice. It clicked open behind me with a soft thunk, just enough to let light spill in from the corridor. I stood, walked out. No one was waiting. No one questioned why I'd been inside. I wandered up to the ground floor in a daze, blinking in the bright fluorescent lights. Staff passed me in the hall, looking straight through me. Visitors brushed my arm like I wasn't there. I didn't speak to anyone, didn't check in. I just drifted. At 4:22 a.m., I found myself in pediatrics again, drawn, the same hallway, the same incubator. Only now, the ceiling vent above it was sealed, covered with new metal. But beneath the crib, scrawled on the wall in grease pencil, were 3 words. It still fits. I left the hospital at dawn, but it followed me. Not directly, not like something chasing footsteps. I didn't hear claws on pavement or find teeth in my back seat. It wasn't that obvious. It was more like pressure just beneath the skin. A sense that I had been touched and the touch hadn't ended. When I reached my apartment, I pulled every piece of furniture to the center of the room and stripped the walls. I unbolted the vent covers, checked every cavity, even turned off the central air and sealed the return with a patch of plywood and duct tape. I didn't eat, didn't speak. I didn't even sit. I just paced. For hours. I called Danny's phone again. Straight to voicemail. I tried Marcus next. Disconnected. Then the janitorial dispatch. The line picked up and went dead. On the 4th try, someone answered and whispered a single word before hanging up. Lower. That was it. Just that. A direction. I didn't know what to make of it, whether it was a warning or an instruction. The next night, I broke into the sub-basement. I used the contractor's master key, long since deactivated by the system, but the lock wasn't electronic. It was still a rusted old latch and bolt. I pried it open with a flathead screwdriver and entered the lowest part of St. Dunstan's. Below the morgue, beneath storage, deeper than the blueprints claimed existed. The smell hit me immediately. Not decay, not even rot. It was sweet, cloying, like fruit gone soft in a sealed container. Mixed with the metallic edge of oxidized blood, I passed the old laundry conveyors, ducked under low piping, and followed the narrow tunnel labeled Service Chute F. The walls were unfinished brick, the mortar peeling like wet scabs. I passed another sign, faded and half covered in mold, post-treatment recovery, Wing D. There was no Wing D, not anymore. St. Dunstan's had decommissioned it after the 1974 fire. Or so we'd been told. But I began to realize something on the walk down that dark hall. The hospital hadn't forgotten this place. It had buried it. The corridor ended at a heavy blast door. The hinges had warped from heat at some point, one side charred black, the other rusted orange. I used both hands to force it open. Behind it, the tunnels changed. Smooth walls, seamless, painted the same clinical green as the upper floors, newer somehow, untouched by age. The air was still, dead. And yet I could hear it again, faint beneath the concrete, a skittering drag. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, 3. I followed it. There were rooms down here, hundreds, all unmarked, each with a grated vent low to the floor, each silent. At one point I passed a glass observation panel. Behind it was a hospital bed, empty, but the mattress had been compressed deeply at one end like something small and very heavy had nested there for a long time. On the whiteboard inside, a message had been written in thick marker. Still learning, needs more mouths. I turned away. I didn't want to know what had once needed that bed. I reached a T-junction, and there in the corner of the hallway was a pile. Not teeth this time, not blankets, clothes, scrubs, ID lanyards, shoes stained with something dark and dry. A badge rested at the top of the pile. Danny's. I knelt, picked it up. The photo was gone, just the plastic sleeve, but I knew it was hers. Her name had been etched into the inside edge with a fine point pen. A small habit of hers, in case it got lost. It hadn't gotten lost. It had been left. I turned and kept walking. The corridor narrowed. The ceiling lowered. Soon I had to crouch. The walls began to sweat. Every few yards I passed a new vent, each wider than the last. One gaped so far open I could have climbed inside. And from one of them, I heard a sound that didn't belong underground. A laugh. Soft, hollow, not joyful, not human. It stopped as soon as I paused. I waited. Another sound followed, dripping. I reached the end of the hall and found a hatch bolted into the floor. No markings, just a metal disc the size of a manhole cover. And beside it, laid out in a neat semicircle, 9 teeth, each a different size, each freshly cleaned. I bent closer. One still had sutures hanging from it. The kind used in emergency extractions. I didn't touch them. Instead, I stepped over the hatch and walked to the far wall, where a final sign was painted above a sealed door. Subject staging. The paint was fresh. The door was ajar. Inside was a room maybe 20 feet square. Every surface was steel. The lights came on automatically, motion sensitive like a freezer unit. There was no furniture, no equipment, just lines, marked on the floor, chalk outlines, some small, some large, all carefully drawn. Each circled a drain set into the tile. In the center of the room, a large one, human-sized, was drawn in meticulous detail. Teeth outlined the skull. I stepped forward and heard something crunch underfoot. Not bone, not tile, a crown. I picked it up. Engraved on the inside was a name, Wexley. I staggered back and hit the wall. My breath came in heaves, my chest hurt. That's when I realized I wasn't alone in the room. I didn't hear it enter, but I felt it. Air shifted behind me, slightly warmer than the rest of the chamber. I turned slowly. There, in the corner behind the lighting fixture, something moved. It unfolded from itself like a massive wet rope uncoiling. It had no face, no features, just a rough silhouette of something designed to navigate pipes and spaces too small for people. The limbs were wrong, jointless. The back arched like a centipede curling mid-step. It didn't advance, it didn't charge, it just pressed itself along the wall, spreading wide like water seeping into a cloth. And from the center of its body, where no mouth should have been, a sound rose. Not a growl, a whisper, not in words, but in motion. It scraped one limb across the wall 3 times, then dragged it in a curve, a shape, a letter, then another, and another, When it pulled back, the scratches formed a word, hollow. Then it vanished up into the vent above. Gone. The light in the room dimmed. The air turned sour. The teeth on the floor began to shake, not tremble, chatter, a sound like jawbones clapping together. I ran, out of the room, down the hall, past the piles of lanyards and scrub shirts, back into the narrow passage that brought me there. I didn't stop until I was at the basement stairwell. I didn't breathe until I slammed the door behind me and wedged it shut with a pipe I found behind the janitor's shelf. I stood there in the dark, shaking, listening, and for a while there was silence. Then, faint and dry from behind the door, click, click, tap. I didn't sleep after that. Not that night, not since. I went home in the morning because I didn't know where else to go. My car smelled like bleach and metal. My clothes were damp from sweat. The bruise behind my ear had faded, but something else had replaced it. A knot under the skin, hard and aching, like a buried blister waiting to rise. At home, I yanked every vent from the wall again, resealed them with plywood, caulk, and screws, blocked every duct, cracked open my walls looking for anything hollow. I moved into the living room and slept in a lawn chair under a standing lamp that never turned off. It didn't help. The house still pulsed at night. I could feel the rhythm behind the drywall, not air, not machinery, something slower, like something breathing through the foundation. At 2:14 a.m., I heard movement above the ceiling tiles, just one pass, from end to end, not scurrying, not rapid, just pacing. The thing was waiting, letting me know it could be patient, that it didn't have to take. It could watch, measure, learn. By sunrise, I had made my decision. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't flee to another city, only to lie awake somewhere new listening for pipes to shift. I would go back into the hospital. One last time. But I wouldn't do it unarmed. I packed a tool bag, crowbar, hammer, bolt cutters, flashlight, wire snips, zip ties, chalk, lighter. Everything I could carry. Then I stopped at a hardware store and bought two things I hadn't used in years, quick-set cement and a power drill. The idea wasn't to kill it. I knew better, but I could seal part of it, trap it, find where it nested and cage it inside a corner of its own home, just long enough for proof, long enough to be believed. The hospital was quiet that evening, more than usual. I noticed it before I even reached the staff entrance. No ambulances, no visitors, no nurses smoking on the loading dock, just that hollow hum in the walls. The same low note I had heard in Wing D, like the building itself had learned to exhale. Inside, the fluorescent lights blinked like they always did. But none of the elevators were working. Every floor button was dead. I took the stairs, down, not up, sub-level B again. Then the access corridor to the tunnel behind the laundry chute. I didn't bother hiding this time. I didn't sneak. If it wanted me, it would have me. There was no more pretending otherwise. I passed the same hall where I'd found the lanyards. They were gone now. No pile, no stains. As if someone had swept up the bodies but left the air thick with memory. That smell of fruit and blood had returned, sweet, syrupy rot soaked into concrete. I returned to the cavity with the metal hatch in the floor. The teeth were gone, but something else had been left in their place. A stethoscope. Mine. I hadn't worn it in 2 weeks. It was curled neatly on the ground beside the hatch, like a pet waiting at the door. I picked it up. The earpieces were wet. I dropped it immediately and kicked it aside. It hit the wall with a splat. Something dark flung off the diaphragm and spattered the corner. Then I knelt and unpacked my tools, first the drill, then the bolt locks. I planned to reinforce the hatch cover first, seal it shut with plated steel brackets and drill points sunk into the concrete. Not permanent, but enough. The metal was warm under my hands and vibrating, not like a motor, not regular, just responsive, like something on the other side could feel me pressing down. It didn't push back, not yet. I started drilling. The noise echoed through the hallway, bouncing back in metallic ricochets that made my ears throb. The first bolt sank clean. The second resisted. Something inside the hatch made a thunk as the tip punched through. I paused, waited. Nothing. Then I continued. Third bolt, fourth. The drill chattered in my hands like it didn't want to go any deeper. On the fifth bolt, the drill bit snapped, clean off. Metal flared and shrieked as the broken piece twisted out of the hole and landed beside me. Then silence. Complete. Even the hum in the walls stopped. The whole basement held its breath, and I finally heard it. From inside the hatch, a noise I hadn't heard before. Chewing, slow, wet, rhythmic. I leaned down, pressing my ear to the edge of the hatch. I didn't want to. My body didn't move by choice. It moved by compulsion, like some part of me had already been trained to obey. Inside the metal, I heard teeth, dozens, maybe hundreds, clattering in a slow syncopation, a sound like bones being arranged by hand. Then a voice, not words. Just one sound, drawn out, guttural, a long, slow inhale that ended in a hiss. Shh, that's all. A breath, but it was enough. I scrambled back, shoulder hitting the wall, dropping the drill. My hands were shaking too badly to grab the hammer, my mouth filled with the taste of copper and glue, not blood, something chemical, manufactured. The air was being pulled in, like the room itself had begun to inhale. Then, from the vent just above the hatch, I heard it, a second voice, smaller, human, childlike. Don't seal it. I froze. It came again, softer now, from the dark. Please, he's almost done. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The vent cover above me trembled, dust rained down, and from between the slats a single object fell, a finger, small, human, mummified, still wearing a hospital wristband. I didn't read the name. I couldn't. I left everything behind. Tools, bags, cement. I ran, up the stairs, past the morgue, out into the cold parking lot where the wind couldn't carry that sickly sweet air. I didn't stop until I hit the street. Didn't turn around. I walked for 6 blocks before I finally dropped to my knees and threw a bile and acid into the gutter. My stomach cramped until I could barely breathe. When I finally stood, I checked my phone. No missed calls, no new texts, just one notification, a voicemail, unknown number, no timestamp. I played it. At first, just static, then a dry, clicking noise, then a voice I hadn't heard in over a month. Danny, whispering. I see it now, all of it. Every name, every root, every molar. I think it's counting backward. A pause. Then, I shouldn't have looked in the duct. I wasn't ready. A click, and silence. I didn't listen to the voicemail again. Once was enough. The phrase haunted me. I think it's counting backward. I didn't know what Danny meant, not fully, but I had a feeling. A grim, low suspicion sitting in the back of my skull like an itch I couldn't reach. I started thinking about the missing. Not just the obvious ones, Marcus, Danny, Wexley, but the quiet names that slipped away without fanfare. I started making a list. 42. That's how many staff and patients had disappeared from Pavilion C in the past year. Most weren't reported missing. Most were transferred, discharged, released to family, or in 2 cases removed for cause. But I knew the real reason. I knew what was being built under the floors. It wasn't just collecting, it was curating, and every name scratched off the logs brought it one step closer to something finished. A number kept circling my thoughts. 50. I didn't know why. I hadn't seen it written anywhere. It was just a shape behind the veil of everything else, a finality I could feel in my bones. 50 pieces, 50 parts, 50 teeth maybe, although by now there must have been hundreds in its nests. But I no longer believed it was just about teeth. That was just the pattern we could see. What else was it taking? I went back to the hospital the next night, not as an employee. That had ended. My badge was dead. My name was gone, but I still had my hands, my memories, my access routes. I entered through the old oxygen corridor under the west wing. The door hadn't been used in decades, but it was never sealed properly. The lock plate had rusted through years ago. I used a crowbar in my knee. The basement welcomed me like it knew I was coming. I didn't use lights, didn't need to. I followed the hum, past the morgue, past the sealed staging room, and into a place I hadn't found before. A stairwell, narrow and circular, descending deeper than the rest. I never knew it existed. None of the floor plans I'd studied showed it. There were no railings, only handholds sunk into the wall. slick with condensation. The further down I went, the warmer it became. Not just warm, moist. The air felt wet, like the inside of a mouth, and the hum, it wasn't electrical anymore. It was organic, living. The stairwell opened into a chamber roughly the size of the central lobby, oval-shaped. The walls weren't brick or steel, they were bone, ribbed, arched, fused together like vertebrae laid end to end. I couldn't tell if it was man-made or something else, but I couldn't deny what I was seeing. It was a room built from parts, not mechanical, biological, not the kind you buy, the kind you harvest. In the center of the room stood a platform, stainless steel, 6 feet long, curved like a mortuary gurney. Above it hung a surgical light, still wired, still working. The moment I stepped closer, it clicked on, not with a flicker, not with delay. It knew I was there. Under the light lay a shape, small, child-sized, covered with a sheet. I didn't want to pull it back, but I did. Underneath was not a body, not fully, just parts. Teeth, laid into a jawbone half-formed, a spine made of surgical tubing and catheter wire, a chest cavity armored with discarded molars. Something had been assembled here. Or was being assembled. A prototype, a framework. I took a step back and nearly tripped over a cart covered in files, paper, old-school records, like the hospital used to keep before the digital conversion. Each folder had a subject number, no names, just scans, molds, dental x-rays, tissue compatibility, bone density charts, each one labeled with the same footer: candidate viability, lower network integration. They weren't experiments, they were components. The door behind me slammed shut. No wind, no weight, just intention. I spun, but no one was there. Just me, and the room, and the parts. The walls began to vibrate again, not with sound, with feeling. That pressure in the chest before lightning strikes. I felt it in my joints, my gums, my jaw, my molars throbbed, like something inside them remembered, or was being remembered. And then, from the center of the ceiling, a slow exhale. Wet, shuddering, as though something very large had just smelled me for the first time. I ran. I didn't plan my steps, I just moved. Out the chamber, up the bone-ribbed stairwell. Scrambling so fast I missed half the handholds and scraped my arms raw against the wall. When I reached the top, the passage was closed. No door, no seam. Just a smooth slab of wall that hadn't been there before. I backed away. My flashlight flickered and died. Then something moved behind me. Not a creature. Not yet. Just the sound of rearrangement, flesh being reordered, a new shape forming where a hallway used to be. I pressed my hand to the wall, felt for anything, heat, a crack, a weak point. My fingers came away slick, red, not fresh, old blood, dried, then moistened again by breath. The lights overhead began to flicker in rhythm. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, 3. That same pattern, over and over. The teeth were counting. The thing in the vents wasn't just a monster. It wasn't even a singular creature. It was a process, a method, one the hospital had long ago buried and forgotten, or maybe never stopped using. I fell to my knees, not from pain, from exhaustion, from knowing I had seen too much. And then, in the flickering light, I saw something on the floor beside me. A photo, curled at the edges, water damaged. I picked it up. It showed a patient in bed, young, male, smiling, a familiar smile. I flipped it over. The back read, Subject 50, integration scheduled, and below that, a date. Tomorrow. I folded the photo and put it in my pocket. I don't know why. Maybe because it was proof. Maybe because it was a name without a name. Or maybe because I was starting to feel like a photo myself, curled at the corners, half remembered, fading into something no one would notice missing. Subject 50, integration scheduled. The word integration stuck in my head like a splinter. Not death, not disappearance, integration. As if people weren't being taken, they were being added. Absorbed, components in a larger structure, one too quiet to see and too slow to stop. The lights overhead buzzed and steadied again. The wall that had sealed behind me now felt different beneath my palm, softer. Not crumbling but warm, flesh warm. There was no way back up, which left only one direction, down. I walked until the walls began to pulse. No metaphor, no exaggeration. They pulsed. A subtle movement, barely perceptible unless you stopped and let your eyes adjust. The lines in the paneling rippled with breath, rising and falling every 30 seconds. I followed the rhythm like a swimmer timing waves, always moving forward just before each exhale. The tunnel narrowed. Lights disappeared. Eventually, I entered a space with no floor, just a soft membrane that bowed gently underfoot. I felt movement beneath it, liquid motion, something circulating just under the surface. I wasn't in a hospital anymore. I was in it. The vent system was never designed for air. It was always a circulatory loop, carrying parts, carrying us. Somewhere deeper, I heard chewing again. Not frenzied, not loud, slow, satisfied. And over it, the soft percussion of click, click, click as something sorted through bone. I emerged into a dome-shaped chamber that smelled of copper and vinegar. It glistened. Every surface was slick, sheened with condensation or something thicker. Light came from a single dangling bulb in the center, its cord strung through a metal loop in the ceiling. Below it, the operating table, stainless steel. Used. The figure lying on it was incomplete. No face, no organs, just the rough outline of a torso packed with tubing and gauze. I didn't look too long, because behind it, mounted into the far wall, was the mouth. Not a real mouth, not a living one, but an aperture, oval, rimmed with teeth, real teeth, dozens, maybe hundreds, some still in fragments of jawbone, others embedded in what looked like synthetic gum. They formed a ring around a black hole in the wall, just wide enough to crawl into, just inviting enough to suggest purpose. Above it, scrawled in that same grease pencil script, "Feeding chute, stage 50. I dropped the crowbar. There was no need for tools anymore. I stepped back, raised the lighter I had stashed in my pocket, flicked it once. Again. It wouldn't stay lit. The air here was wrong. Thin, greasy. I pulled the lighter close to my chest, cupped it, and finally caught a flame. Then I pulled the bottle from my jacket. Accelerant, stolen from an old HVAC cleaning kit. I doused the wall, the teeth, the chute, everything. I lit it and ran. Behind me, the fire flared once, then vanished. Like it had been eaten, not suppressed. Consumed. The chamber didn't burn, it swallowed. I ran until the walls began to flatten again, until tile reappeared beneath my feet, until real industrial lights glared overhead, and the sound of machines returned, vents hissing, IVs dripping, monitors beeping. I came up through a laundry chute on the north end of Pavilion C. Somehow I hadn't been gone long. Outside the windows, it was still dark, 3:42 a.m. The hallway was empty. The vents overhead were silent, and just when I thought maybe I'd escaped, I heard the voice again. A whisper from inside the wall. Not Danny, not a mimic, just a voice, familiar and wrong, saying the words, "You were never 50. I didn't turn around. I walked, one foot in front of the other, through the automatic doors, past the ambulance bay, into the cold air of the parking lot where the moon lit the frost on every windshield. I didn't take my car. I walked until my legs gave out. Then I called in the last favor I had left, an old contact from a city clinic, a man who'd once worked surgical supply before a bad lawsuit took his license. He owed me a favor for a morphine mix-up I covered a decade ago. I told him I needed a room, unregistered, with no vents. He laughed, then said, "Meet me in an hour." That's where I've been since, writing this, cataloging everything, while my teeth ache and my gums pulse and I still taste duck dust every time I breathe through my nose. I have 6 teeth loose now, not rotting, just relocating. I can feel them pushing up, like the roots want out, like they've been marked. Lately I dream of long corridors built from soft walls, ribbed ceilings, air that pulses, and something behind me, always just out of sight, whispering combinations of numbers and tapping the floor with something long and hard and sharp. When I wake up, my bed is always warm, on both sides, and last night I found a single cotton swab tucked into my pillowcase. The label said, "Candidate preserved, integration deferred." I I'm writing this because I know I'm not the only one, because the thing in the vents is not a creature, it's an organ, part of something wider, older, wired through the bones of St. Dunstan's like a vascular system, pulsing and breathing and feeding on the unnoticed. The forgotten, the people who vanish between scans, who don't make the rounds sheet, who code blue and get shuffled into a report marked pending. It doesn't need attention. It needs time. And now it has everything it needs, because I've seen the next patient file, subject 51, and the photograph, the one left on the gurney under the teeth? It wasn't a stranger, it was me, smiling, holding a clipboard, standing in front of Pavilion C like I belonged there, and behind me, just out of focus, a black oval cut into the wall, waiting,